Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this live program in which I have the great privilege of introducing to you men and women who, because of their great love for Jesus Christ, were drawn home to the Catholic Church. I want to just make a little comment. This is an exciting program tonight for a number of reasons, but one of which, this is my first time on EWTN since we've gotten a new Holy Father. And it's that bittersweet, because we miss our wonderful Pope John Paul. But we also recognize the beauty and the great grace of God in our new Saint Pope Benedict XVI. And so this is going to be an exciting time for all of us. There's going to be lots of great things that we're going to experience from this wonderful Bavarian Pope. And I was just joking with our guests that, of course, one of the greatest things of this new Pope is it gave me an excuse to wear my Bavarian jacket. So maybe we'll start a Bavarian men's club in honor of our new Bavarian Pope. Our guest tonight is Dr. Paul Schenck. And he's here to talk about his journey and also his work in serving the Lord. But we want to begin the program by giving you the phone numbers because your calls and questions are an essential part of this program. It's 1-800-221-9460. Outside North America, you can give us a call at 205-271-2980, or you can send us an email at journeyhome@ewtn.com. Paul, welcome to The Journey Home.
Thank you, Marcus.
It's good to have you here. There's so much we'd like to talk about because of your work, your pro-life work, which is so essential. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So I'm going to quit talking and give you the floor, and we can start right away by inviting you to share with the audience your early spiritual journey.
Certainly. Mine was, to be sure, an eclectic one. And I was raised Jewish. But that's only the beginning of the story. My mother was not born Jewish. My mother was baptized in the Roman Rite. Her mother was Catholic. Her father Episcopalian, my grandfather. Now I speak a little bit at a distance only because my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, died when my mother was 17 years old. And I knew my maternal grandfather very little. He died when I was about 5 years old. So I only know them of the stories told about them. My mother married and had 2 children, and then her first husband died very tragically at his own hand, leaving my mother a young widow with 2 young children, my sisters, whom I love dearly, very dearly. And my mother was struggling to support herself as a seamstress. This is in the days before the welfare state was in place and all the kinds of programs that are available to someone in distress that are still there today, but we're not in that day. So my mother was really struggling, living in an apartment, trying to make a way, supporting my sisters. And my father moved into the apartment building, and my father is what I've come to call the quintessential rescuer. He was 9 years my mother's junior, and a single bachelor, moved into the apartment building, saw a woman in distress with 2 young children, decided to become her aide and support and careful helper, and then pledged his love to her and announced that they would marry. Well, his family said, oy vey, our son's going to marry a Gentile woman with 2 children. And that was very difficult for my father's family to swallow. Well, for my dad, it was a question of his family's response or his love for my mother. And they were determined to proceed regardless of the price that had to be paid for this. But my mother was the quintessential peacemaker. So my mother said that she would convert to Judaism and marry my father and raise their children Jewish. So my brother and I were born 2 years later. I say we were born together. We were identical twins. And we were raised from the start in Hebrew school, in the synagogue, but this made for a very funny Christmas season because they didn't take Christianity away from my sisters. So this was Christmas. Now later, I'm jumping ahead, because later I become a Christian pastor, a Protestant pastor. That's for the second part of the show or something, I don't know. But at this point, I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. And what do we do with 2 Jewish children and 2 children who have been, who have had the church? So have had Christianity. So what do we do? So when I was a pastor, we were sitting around one Christmas, and one of the secretaries said, "We always tell the funniest story from our upbringing." It was Christmas. Came to me and I said, "I don't have any Christmas stories." Wait a minute, I do. When I was a boy, my sisters had Christmas. So how do you do that in a home? What they did, my father, Christmas Eve, we all went to bed 10 o'clock. My father then would draw the curtains, go to the back door, pull in a tree, set it up. My mother and he would decorate it, throw out all the gifts. In the morning we would come out. The gifts would be then distributed. Of course, we weren't left out, my brother and I. And then after the gifts were opened, then the tree, all the adornments on the tree would be taken away. The tree would be taken down, out the back door, the windows would open, and now the neighbors never knew the difference. So we had the secret Christmases when I was growing up. And my father used to call it a Hanukkah bush.
Well, I've noticed this last year they were coming out with brand new cards for mixed marriages. You've seen those like Hanukkah Mass, or my father later started talking about the visit of Hanukkah Harry instead of Santa Claus. But so we were raised in Hebrew school. Went to Hebrew school for 6 years, and but my parents raised my brother and me to make the decision as far as our faith when we came of age. So we had the choice to be bar mitzvahed and confirmed in the synagogue, or to explore Christianity, if that's where we wanted to go. And I met a group of wonderful Christian students in school. They were from all denominations, as I remember. They were Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, Catholic, Episcopalian. And there was a small Bible study group, and I found that very intriguing. So I began attending that Bible study fellowship at the school, the high school. And as a result, I started attending church services down at the end of the street, a little Methodist chapel that was pastored. This gets very complicated. The pastor was a Salvation Army officer, because the Methodist church couldn't afford a minister. So a Salvation Army officer used to come and preach. So we were going there on Friday nights for a Bible study and prayer. Did you have Lord's
fellowship.
Supper, though?
We did.
Usually Salvation Army.
Very occasionally, quite occasionally. What you're referring to is the Salvation Army doesn't have sacraments at all. They don't have any Lord's Supper. They don't have any baptism even, which makes it even funnier, because it was that Salvation Army officer that baptized me in the Niagara River in October. So for all of eternity, I will never forget my baptism in the cold Niagara River in October.
Sounds like the Salvation Army guy planned it for October just to
as a Salvation Army officer, he didn't regularly baptize anybody, so he figured when he got one, he was really going to plunge him under, and it had to be up at the headwaters of Niagara Falls and the water going over. And so my brother and I were baptized, came home, my parents were shocked to the core. Now remember, they had given us the freedom, but this was quite a big initiative for my brother and me to take. But still, great liberty to pursue a faith pathway, and that's precisely what we did. Sunday school in the Methodist Church, not to begin with though, because the Methodist Church was too small to have a Sunday school program, so I went to the Presbyterian Church. So the Presbyterian Church for Sunday school, went to the Methodist Church for worship service. And from the very beginning, I felt I wanted to serve God. And I really wanted to serve Him with all my time in life. So my first job in the church was a janitor, and I went in and cleaned up and vacuumed and swept. And one thing led to another, and I found myself going to a rural Bible college run by this gets really complicated, the Mennonites. All right, so went to a Mennonite.
An ultimate ecumenist.
Absolutely, Mennonite Bible College. But it wasn't like I was at a salad bar. It was just that, this was the path, and these were the places that were within reach, and a wonderful little college. But there I was introduced to church history. And when you begin reading church history, that's when the seeds begin to be planted for continuity, for unity. And I know those seeds were planted in my heart at that time. But on I went. It was a missionary school, so the question was, would you serve as a missionary abroad, or would you stay at home, which was usually in that college, it was a sort of a booby prize to stay home. You really wanted to go out in the field somewhere. But I was already with my high school sweetheart. We met when I was just 16 years old. And if I was going to serve the Lord, I wanted to serve the Lord married, and wanted to have a Christian family. So in the second year, I proposed, but only after I went to my wife's parents and asked their permission and their daughter's hand in marriage. Then I went to my parents and I alerted them to my plan and asked for their blessing and received it. So we were married at 18 years old. 18 years old we were married, and I finished college and graduate school. Oh, did I tell you I went to a Baptist seminary? And
I was figuring there was something missing, and there had to be at least a
Baptist
influence
somewhere. Went to a Baptist
somewhere.
seminary and was ordained when I turned 22 years old in a non-denominational church. And so I served as a pastor in a community church for essentially 14 years. And all the while, I'm becoming increasingly Catholic in my thinking. Not yet in my heart, but in my thinking. Because my love for the church fathers, for church history, continued to grow. And in about the midway in my ministry as a pastor in a community church in Western New York, I read a book called The Jewish People and Jesus Christ After Auschwitz. And it was a penetrating examination of the relationship between the Jewish people and Christians in the shadow of the most horrendous event in Jewish history. And I was so intrigued, I wanted to find out about the author, Dr. Jacob Yach. I looked him up. He was a lecturer in systematic theology at the University of Toronto, Canada, 60 miles north of where I lived. So I went to visit him. And he was a third-generation Jewish Christian Anglican priest. This is really a mishmash. The word mishmash was invented for this. And so he said to me, he said, I'm old. He said, I didn't know he was dying. He said, I'm old, I'm sick, I'm writing. You'll write and I'll teach you. So I inherited this magnificent mentor with doctoral degrees, with published works, with incredible grasp of ecumenism, and especially interreligious dialogue with Jewish people. So under this magnificent man, I began to do some work for the New International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. And in the course of this, he and I became quite close. He died. His wife called me and said her husband wished for me to receive his library. It was unbelievable. 3 floors of a Victorian townhome in Toronto filled with books. And out of that came a magnificent collection of Judaica. And of course, with 6 years of Hebrew school, I was able to negotiate my way through Hebrew quite good. And in that was a series of studies on a small fragment of papyrus that had been found in Dura Europos, Syria, between a stone table and a wall of an archaeological site. I think you know something about this because it's a Hebrew fragment For 30 years it circulated. They believed it was a Passover Haggadah. Tonight's second night of Passover. And it was a Passover Haggadah, which is the liturgy for the Passover Seder, the Passover meal. But it reached Dropsy College in Philadelphia, which is one of the world-class institutions on Hebrew and cognate studies. And a Jewish scholar there said, no, this is a Christian Eucharistic liturgy in Hebrew. And I began studying this little fragment, which becomes actually the only existing Hebrew fragment of the Mass. And I said, oy vey. I'm in a non-liturgical, non-apostolic church as a minister, and the apostolic church was liturgical, it was apostolic, it was Catholic. What do I do now? So I began studying and slowly became more and more Catholic in my thinking. But I tell people now, from Niagara Falls, New York, to Rome is a pretty far stretch. So London is a good place to stop in between. Yeah. So I went to the Episcopal Church, and I met some clergy, including my very dear friend Jim Pinto, Episcopal clergyman, now in the Catholic Church, who's been on your program as a guest. And I began a dialogue there. Well, I didn't go to the Episcopal Church, but I went to its cousin, the Reformed Episcopal Church.
Explain the difference there, maybe.
Well, the Reformed Episcopal Church, common history with the Episcopal Church, which is a common history with the Church of England, but a product of the Civil War. After the Civil War, there were some issues, including some doctrinal issues. The Anglo-Catholic movement was one of those issues. The founders of the Reformed Episcopal Church were not Anglo-Catholics.
Really? I didn't know that.
So they were low church evangelicals, mostly from the countryside.
Okay.
And a man named George David Cummins was the assistant bishop of Kentucky, and he was offended by the fact that blacks would not be ordained to the ministry or confirmed in the Episcopal Church in the South. So he ordained and confirmed black members in churches in South Carolina. That led to charges being brought against him. He resigned, took his status as a bishop of the Episcopal Church with him, began ordaining priests in New York and then around the country, and that's how the Reformed Episcopal Church began. So if you think of the Episcopal Church in 1873, that's what the Reformed Episcopal Church was. And I went there for a liturgical church with some apostolic tradition. But it didn't satisfy that longing to be in unity with the Catholic Church, with the true Church of Christ. And when I say true, I don't mean to say that the other churches are false. I mean true in the sense that a carpenter uses true. The measure, the standard to which you measure all the others against, to be certain where they stand. So I was still drawn to Catholicity, to one church, and it was that unity that kept me moving toward the Catholic Church. But now I was a pastor. I became first the Anglican chaplain to an evangelical Christian law school, and a missioner there in Virginia Beach at Regent University, which was founded by Pat Robertson. Right. And then the bishop of that church called me and asked me to consider going to Baltimore, Maryland. Well, my brother, who was a Methodist minister, was near Washington, my twin brother.
Sounds like there's a whole other story there too. But
well, yes, and I'm afraid we would need a series rather than one night. So I wanted to be near Washington, and so I went, and I was called to be the pastor of the church in Baltimore. Wonderful, precious people, loved God, loved us, took my wife and me, and when we went there, 7 children. The rectory was too small. It really was too small, so they had to buy a new rectory to accommodate my family. And I became pastor there. Meanwhile, I'm still restless.
Yeah.
Still restless. And I'm becoming increasingly more Catholic in my heart. Well, before I got there, a whole episode occurred out of Western New York, which landed me in Virginia Beach and then in Baltimore. When I was still a pastor in Western New York, a young couple came to me after a Sunday morning service, and they said to me, something terrible has happened, and we need to see you right away. I said, fine. They came to my office the next morning. They told me they had just moved into the community, that they bought a little house, a bungalow, and a beautiful tree-lined street, and just the ideal starter home. She was rocking the baby in the front room, and out of the medical building across the street, she saw medical personnel in a lab coat with 2 other people with him. He had in his hand what appeared to be a plastic bag. He lifted it up to the sunlight, pushed it, appeared to have some weight, some matter, threw it into the trash dumpster, got into his silver Peugeot, and he drove away. She was so disturbed by what she saw that she told her husband, who worked for a government agency, and he and a friend went into the dumpster and they recovered the bags. And they brought them to my office. They laid them on the table. And they said, open the bags. And I opened them, and in them were the remains of 4 unborn children. Little babies, fit in the palm of your hand. Little baby faces, hands and feet, little depressions where their toenails and fingernails would grow. We could tell the sex on 2 of the children. But these babies were dismembered, eviscerated, decapitated. One little boy's spine was sticking out of his back, arms and legs
Lord Jesus.
severed away. One little girl, dimple in her cheek, her head cut straight in half. And there they lay on the table in my office. And I said, my God, my God, my God. See, until then, I was what I call now pro-life by conviction, but pro-choice by default. I believed abortion was wrong, but people did wrong things and paid the consequences. I never saw the victims lying there in front of me. I said, what did you do? They said, we called the police. What did they tell you? They said, we don't get involved in anything like that. What did you do then? We called the state health department. What did they tell you? They said, we don't have any laws in New York governing the death and disposal of human fetuses. If they were puppies, we could start an investigation.
Oh, Lord.
They said to me, Pastor, what will we do? I didn't know. I had been by many a deathbed. I had even been at a suicide call. But I had never had the victims brought to my own study. I said, we'll bury them here on church property if necessary. And then it occurred to me, if I bury these babies on the church property, the doctor who did this will never know that they were recovered from the trash. So I decided then and there that we would take the babies' caskets to the doctor's front lawn. And we did. 3 caskets for 4 babies. One was so mutilated we couldn't discern the difference. We had Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic clergy. We had 200 people, 2 chiefs of police, town supervisor, mayor. At the last minute, the diocese, the Catholic diocese, gave us burial plots in the Cemetery of the Innocents in Tonawanda, New York, in the cemetery across the street from our church. We had the longest motorcade anyone could remember. We buried those babies. We found 2 more before they got wise to us and put a lock on the trash dumpster. So there are 6 babies now buried there in Mount Olivet Cemetery. So they came to me and they said, Pastor, we're going to go and we're going to pray at the abortion clinic. Will you go? I went home to my wife and I said, if I go, I'm going to be looked at as a madman. After all, I know the mayor, the supervisor, I know the congressman, the senator, first name basis. I say opening prayers for community functions. I'm on the radio twice a day. I had a television Bible study program at the time. I said, I'll become persona non grata if I start this. My wife said, fine. You don't go? I will. I wasn't much of a macho man, but I was enough not to let my wife go ahead of me. So we went. We gathered in front of the facility. This was on the eve of the Billy Graham crusade in Niagara Falls. And I was on the executive committee planning the crusade. We were opening Pilot Field in Buffalo, New York, brand new baseball stadium. Before there was a pitch, we were going to have Billy Graham preach. So I was on the committee. We're planning this. We're expecting 500,000 people at the end of the week. And my people are going to the abortion mill to pray. So we go out, and I did the heroic leadership thing. I went to the back of the line and drew up into a fetal position. And the police came and they said, if you don't all leave, we're going to put you under arrest. Well, I never had a brush with the law. I considered myself a partner with law enforcement, not a criminal. So I stayed behind in my fetal position. I have a hand on my shoulder. Sir, if you do not leave, I'm going to put you under arrest. And then I hear, oh, Pastor, I don't want to do this. And I look up and it's one of my church ushers. It's a police officer. And I said, Warren, you have to do what you have to do. I have to do what I have to do. And he took me into custody, treated me like a VIP. Came out, and we began volunteering at the clinics. Eventually, we had 120 clergy from all denominations. We were at 7 abortion sites all over Western New York. And I was teaching at that same Mennonite Bible college when I got a call from my secretary, you better come home and look at what was delivered. And there was a 2-inch stack of papers appear in federal court next day to answer a show cause order why a federal judge should not enter a ban against me and anyone volunteering with me to offer women last-minute support at the abortion mills. Public sidewalks, mind you. This in front of a post office. So I called the church attorney. He said, no problem, we'll go. It's nonsense, it'll be dismissed. We get to federal court. I'd never been in a federal court before, never laid eyes on a federal judge before. And they tell me my lawyer is not admitted to federal practice and can't represent me. So the judge says, Reverend Schenck, he says, you should get yourself some competent legal counsel. But I looked up there and I saw a podium in front of the room. It sure looked like a pulpit to me. So I stood up, I said, Your Honor, I don't have a law degree and I'm not a lawyer, but I've read the First Amendment to the Constitution and this doesn't appear to be the First Amendment to me. We hassled and wrangled for half an hour. Finally, he turned to the abortionist's attorney. He said, what do you say? And she said, he's entitled to believe whatever he wants to believe. But if he acts on that belief, then he'd be in contempt of this court's order. The judge said, I agree, signed the order against me. So the next Christmas, I was out passing out Bibles with a hopeful message, pro-life literature, on a sidewalk, offering counsel and advice to women in crisis. Just to give you an example, a woman came out and she said, if you want this baby to be saved, then you better convince the baby's father to come home and take care of his wife and his children. I said, let's go find him. So we got in a car, drove into the center city, found him at his mother's house. I walked straight through. In those days, I was Episcopalian, I wore a collar. I walked straight through. I said, sir, your child's life is in your hands. His head fell into his hands. He wept and sobbed. We prayed there. He made a pledge of love and commitment to his wife. He came home. That baby was born. So that's the kind of thing that happened. But one day, a couple walked out of the back of the building, past the post office. He wanted to punch my lights out. She said, he's just talking about God. I'll talk to him. So I continued to talk to her. Another woman took the Bible close to her and said, thank you. I was cited 5 counts of violating the judge's order. Appeared in federal court, and the judge found me guilty of violating the man's right to be left alone and the woman's access. Never mind, she was a middle-aged woman. I don't think she was abortion bound. I still don't think that. She took the Bible. He said I impeded her access to abortion. Convicted on all 5 counts. The trial lasted 5 months. I appeared before the judge for sentencing. He said, you've been a one-man army in this respect. Got to make I'm characterizing what he said, paraphrasing. He said, I have to make an example of you. And all I heard was, I sentence you to 2 years in federal custody. I didn't hear him say, you'll spend a month in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, 2.5 hours from my home, 5 months under house arrest while you appeal your sentence and 18 months under probation. 2-year sentence. $300,000 fine. Put me into bankruptcy. I never declared bankruptcy, but de facto bankruptcy. And so I asked for a stay of sentence, which is typically given. A drug offender or a thief will get a stay of sentence pending appeal. Denied. Straight to prison. So I went to the federal prison, McKean Federal Correctional Facility. Like to say I'm an alumnus. And went to McKean. And when I arrived, they told me that the chaplain, Protestant chaplain, a member of a liberal Christian denomination, wanted nothing to do with me because of my position on abortion. So I was in prison with no church, nowhere to go to worship, nowhere to remember the Lord's Supper. And the sacristan, who was a prisoner, came to me and said, "Father said you are welcome at Mass." And see what happens? So my family could come to the prison and worship with me. Wasn't that nice? My wife and children could come and worship on Sundays with me as a prisoner. They had a bank of candy machines and soda machines, vending machines. So my kids, who were little at the time, they just loved Daddy's prison. They'd say, "Can we go to Daddy's prison this Sunday?" So we'd go to worship, we'd go to Mass, and then we'd go to the vending machines with my children. This was just on Sunday, while I was in. But I appealed, and I went to Mass. And there was the Lord's true body and blood. There was the true church, opening her arms to me, embracing me, Protestant minister, convicted felon. I was not wanted by my own minister because of the position I had taken on life, but the church reached out her arms and embraced me to her heart. And so my Catholic brain became a Catholic heart. And that's when I began praying for reunion with the Catholic Church. I knew I needed to be there in the Catholic Church. So I wind up in Baltimore as a Reformed Episcopal minister. And one day, should I go on like this?
Why don't we take a break?
All right.
We'll take a break right now and we'll come back and let you give us the rest of the story, as that famous radio host would say. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, Paul. Powerful story, and I know we've got phone callers and emails that are ready to ask you questions, but we need to hear the rest of the story. In the midst of that, it's interesting how often God uses tragedy and horrendous evil to open our eyes to good, to goodness, to the fullness of what His truth is. And it sounds like that's part of what God used to bring you back home to the church. Is that right?
That's right. And when I was in prison, a prisoner came by one day and threw the newspaper on my bed. And he said, "Did you see today's paper?" I said, "No." Picked it up, and on the front page was a story. I had won my appeal in the United States Court of Appeals. 3-judge federal panel had voted 2-1, striking down the order against me and my conviction as a violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. I'm overjoyed. I'm calling my wife. I'm calling my parents. And they said, "You have to leave the prison by 8 8:30 tomorrow morning, because otherwise we get charged for another day of your being here.
Oh, see, that's
So
all
I didn't want that to happen. So my wife came out at 8 o'clock in the morning, picked me up at the prison. But in the outtake, they said, you can't go home, go directly to the federal courthouse. All right, so I go directly to the federal courthouse, and they said, surprise, the chief judge has rescinded the finding of the 3-judge panel and has reinstated your sentence.
What?
And remanded it for rehearing. A 3-judge panel sits at the pleasure of the chief judge, and the chief judge didn't like the outcome of the 3-judge panel, so he struck it down, and he remanded it for something called en banc review, which is extraordinary. All the judges of the entire circuit have to sit and hear the case re-argued. That's 17 federal judges in Manhattan. Now, can you imagine the number of golf games that had to be rescheduled for 17 federal judges to sit and hear my case all over again? They had to come in from 3 states. So they said, meanwhile, you'll spend...
They probably weren't happy campers.
Well, and I had to spend that time waiting under house arrest, wearing an electronic ankle bracelet on my foot. My phone was tapped. I had to apply for travel permit to go anywhere. This, by the way, all under the Clinton Justice Department at that point. So I went to Virginia Beach, where I was a prisoner in my home for 5.5 months. We went to Manhattan in January of the next year. We argued the case in front of 17 judges. 15 voted, 2 abstained. It went 8-7 against me. By 1 judge's vote, I lost, and my case was reinstated, my sentence, and I was put under federal probation. And my attorneys, one an evangelical and one a Catholic, said to me, let's petition the Supreme Court. Well, I knew from the very beginning we were going to end up there, but I didn't know how. I'd already spent almost $300,000 in defense expenses. I'd raised money from every corner I could possibly raise it. And finally, I said, let's go. I had no idea how we were going to do this. And Jay Sekulow, who was a tremendous Christian constitutional lawyer, contacted me, said he was willing to argue the case. 7 attorneys were assigned. We began preparing. We petitioned the United States Supreme Court in March of that year. We were granted certiorari. In October, we went to the United States Supreme Court. We argued the case. Against me was the Attorney General of New York, the National Organization of Women, a number of organizations. State University of New York School of Law was arguing against me, all that I should go back to prison. And at the last minute, 6 weeks before the case was heard, President Bill Clinton entered the case and asked permission from the court to send the Solicitor General of the United States, Walter Dellinger, Harvard law professor and top of President Clinton's list for Supreme Court justice, and to send him to argue against me that I should go back to prison. So I was given the decision, and the custom was if the president asked to be heard, you give him permission, so we did. So on that morning, there were 2 attorneys, one from Yale University that would argue against me, that I should go back to prison, that my case should be upheld, that is the case against me, and also the Solicitor General of the United States, the top litigation lawyer of the United States, also was to argue against me, and Jay Sekulow would argue for me. So when it came time, the night before, we got on our faces and prayed, Lord, confuse the opposition. We had everything stacked against us. Confuse the opposition. That morning, the Solicitor General of the United States, representing the President, arguing that my case should be upheld and go back to prison, began confusing the justices. Now, if I sit in the Supreme Court today, I can tell you who the justices are. He couldn't. He kept mixing up Justice O'Connor with Justice Ginsburg. Justice O'Connor made Justice Ginsburg as mad as a hornet, and she turned purple. She was so angry. Finally, he slapped himself, and he said, why do I keep doing this? Now, this is the Solicitor General of the United States, but we knew why. We knew why he was confused. And the case came down in February of '97, 8-1 in my favor, striking down the order against me, fundamental violation of my First Amendment right, struck down laws just like it across the country. But it was 7 years and $778,000 in defense expenses before we reached the United States Supreme Court. But God vindicated us and opened the sidewalks again for sidewalk counselors and assistants like we were giving. Now I'm in Baltimore and I'm a pastor. I'm doing some pro-life work, but my chief work is taking care of a church. And a couple comes in and they're separating. And he said, I know she's to be my wife, that's God's will. But he said, we're content to live separately, we have enough money, we'll have 2 houses and we'll share the children. I said, no. There has to be an organic expression of unity in your marriage. You have to share the same food. You have to share the same roof. You have to live together in peace and harmony. They agreed. They reconciled, left my office, and I sat down and I looked at myself and I said, you hypocrite. You would tell them that there has to be an organic expression of unity, and you are content to live separate from the body of Christ. You don't eat their food. You don't worship under the same roof. You don't have the same pastor. And I realized then, I can't any longer be separated from the church. But it took my daughter. It says a child shall lead them. At the end of the driveway one afternoon, my daughter said, Dad, can I talk with you? I said, sure. She said, Dad, with all my love and all due respect, you've been my dad and my pastor all my life. But the church should have one pastor. And there's none better than the Holy Father in Rome. And I agreed. And my daughter was received into the church with me standing with her in my clerical collars from the Episcopal Church. And she was the first to come. And then I was invited to the Holy Land by the Greek Catholic Archbishop of Jerusalem. I've been there a number of times for the Holy Father's pilgrimage from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. So I was with the papal entourage and by the altar in the birthplace of Christ, the body and the blood in front of me and behind me and all around me, a sea of humanity receiving the Blessed Sacrament, the Lord's body and blood. I came home, began praying, and I asked for our Blessed Mother's assistance, and then I went really out on a limb for a Protestant minister. I asked for Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, Edith Stein, the great Holocaust martyr. I asked for her assistance in asking the Lord to make a way for me and my family to come to the Catholic Church. And the door opened when Father Frank Pavone asked me to join him in Priests for Life and to open the Washington, D.C. base of Priests for Life. And that's how the Lord made the way for us to come. In February of 2004, I was received, and on that Sunday, I received First Penance, Reconciliation. I received First Holy Eucharist, Confirmation, and marriage. We brought our marriage into the church, our 26-year marriage into the church. So we got all that grace in one Mass.
Wow. Wow.
One Mass. It was like grace over, it was like a flood of grace just pouring out all over it. St. Roch's Church, Father Leo Prince, very, very dear friend, received me into the church.
Oh, Paul, it's amazing how the Lord has used drastic things to get your attention in your journey.
Yeah, I don't know what that says about how dull I am.
Well,
it took a lot to move me forward.
Well, when you think about even what, like the great Catholic spiritual writers, John of the Cross, and talk about the dark night of the soul, that sometimes God, in the mystery of His will, leads us, allows us, however you want to say it, through these dark times to see what we're made of. You know, are we really going to trust Him and His grace, or are we going to fall back and...
Oh, that was tested. Oh, that was tested. And God had to give lots of grace to me, because there were many times that the pressure was on.
All right, let's take our first call. It's come John from New Jersey. Hello, John, what's your question?
Good evening, Marcus.
Yep.
First of all, I want to say how very much I enjoy your program.
Thank you, John.
Monday night, 8 o'clock, I don't want to do anything else but listen to you.
Well, thanks, John.
I was very interested in your guest tonight, primarily when I first heard him tell us he was coming from a Jewish background, and I saw the name Benedicta in his name. I was wondering if, in fact, he took that from Edith Stein, who was Sister Teresa Benedicta.
Talk a little bit more about that.
That's absolutely right. Many people say, Benedicta, that's the feminine. And in solidarity with her and in respect and honor for the intercessions that she made for me, and made the way to come to the church, I took her name, Benedicta, as my confirmation name. So that's how that happened.
And there's lots of parallels there too, because look at what she went through, the struggles she went through, and what the Lord also called you to defend.
Doesn't begin to rise to my troubles, were small.
Give you a taste. Let's go to Linda from New York. Hello, Linda. What's your question?
Hi. I was talking to somebody today. It's funny that this is, on tonight, but she was saying how our church has not stated in a strong point of view that birth starts from conception. And I was wondering if this is true, and why don't we press the point that at the moment of conception there is life.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure, thank you, Linda.
Well, as I understand it, the church makes it very clear. I don't think it could be clearer than it is in Evangelium Vitae, Pope John Paul II's magnificent treatise on the sanctity of life, called the Gospel of Life, or Evangelium Vitae, Donum Vitae, the Catechism. Perhaps what your friend is saying is that there isn't a specific scientific document of some sort, but it is most certainly there.
Right.
From conception to natural death, this is how the church defines life, and there's no difference between the value of a life in the womb at the time of birth, under any circumstances, in life, or at the time of, essentially the dusk of life.
But isn't it also true, and of course I agree with that, isn't it also true that many medical books, though, however, recognize this same fact?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the early literature, even from, dare I say, the name Planned Parenthood, they recognize life began at conception. There is, in fact, a book by Ashley Montague, the atheist secularist, who wrote for Planned Parenthood in the 1960s, called Life Before Birth. And he gives a chronology of the life that unfolds from the moment of conception. This is what I've come to call the abortion distortion. It distorts everything. It distorts law, philosophy, marriage, family, all of it. Science, it's all distorted by trying to deny the personhood of the unborn child.
All right, let's take our next caller, Jody from New York. Hello, what's your question?
Hi, how are you? I enjoy your show.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, you were talking before about a fragment found at an archaeological dig of, I believe you said it was the Mass written in Hebrew.
Yes.
Do you know where that was found, and if it had been dated at all, and where it is now?
Well, they think that it comes from the early 2nd century, perhaps the 3rd. It was found at the Dura Europa synagogue site, which is in Syria now. And it's a fragment of Hebrew which is similar, very similar, to the Eucharistic liturgy in the Didache, which is the oldest Christian document outside the New Testament that we have, and it's in Greek. This is a Hebrew version of that. So that means that there were Hebrew Catholics in the Holy Land. Of course there were, obviously. But the point is that...
Well, we take that for granted, right? I mean, today we forget our Jewish roots sometimes.
Yeah. That's right. In fact, I was going to the dentist, our Jewish dentist, one time, and my daughter was in the back seat, and she said, Daddy, she said, I thought that the doctor was Jewish. And I said, well, he is, sweetheart. And she said, but he doesn't believe in Jesus.
He's on the journey. Let's pray for that. Our next caller from Colorado. Al, hello, what's your question tonight?
Hello. I respect your show
Thank you.
very much, and I learn from it. It's a learning experience. And Dr. Paul, I have a question. I respect you so much for your views on the right to life, that on the Episcopal Church, is the Church of England and the American Episcopal Church one and the same, and do they hold your views?
Unfortunately, the Episcopal churches in most places have been ambiguous when it comes to the sanctity of human life before birth. Yes, most of the churches in the world, with very few exceptions, take the position that of the personhood of the unborn child. But in practice, it's widely ignored or excused away, and in some cases, the churches become downright pro-abortion, which is an absolute travesty. But in the case, now keep in mind, I was not an Episcopal priest. I was a Reformed Episcopal minister. That's a different church with a similar history, common history. But once the churches separate themselves from the apostolic root and from the unity which is embodied in the Vicar of Christ, that's when the troubles begin. Because it's like the movement away from Eden. It's very slow, and but you're going further and further away. And the further away you go, the more prone to error and fault you are in that respect. It's just an astounding thing to see how the Catholic Church has retained this magnificent body of apostolic teaching, which is unchanged, absolutely unchanged, which makes it so funny when you hear these commentators, for instance, with the election of Pope Benedict XVI, as if a pope is going to come along and say, never mind. This doesn't
the
happen.
The audacity of him to take a stand for what is true.
This is the revelation. This is Christianity. Now, you want something else, you go shopping at another store. But this is unchangeable.
There's an email. Let's see if we can try and get this in. It covers a lot of ground. It comes from Marie. Dear Marcus and guests, what do you think of the current crises from the courts, for example, what happened to Terry Schiavo? What can we do about the filibustering and blustering Senate, Marie?
Well, what happened to Terry Schiavo was a terrible, terrible tragedy. And it was a threshold that we dare not cross again. It should not have been crossed this time. She was a victim of judicial homicide. There is no doubt about it. A court in the United States of America ordered that a woman's food and water be taken from her and that she die as a result. This is the beginning of court-sanctioned euthanasia. It has been being practiced in the United States, but pretty much with the ignorance of the courts. Now the courts have actually affirmed the decision to impose euthanasia on someone. So what we must do is we must work to replace judges who assume to themselves an authority which is not theirs, neither by God's law nor by the Constitution of the United States. And the only way to do that is to elect judges that are, for lack of a better term, conservative, only meaning they don't believe in adding rights and adding laws that do not have any basis in the Constitution of the United States. The first goal and the first responsibility of government is to protect the citizens' lives. And so we have to work on getting good judges in there, and there are ways to do that. The Senate's working on that now.
Well, part of it is just following the way our country's been established with the three aspects of government, right?
True. What's been allowed to happen is the judiciary has been allowed to trump the other two branches, and they're co-equal, and they're checks and balances against each other.
So much to cover on this program, Paul. So much good stuff. Thank you very much. But I want one last question. Now, usually at the end of the program, what I've done this year is ask the guests to talk to whatever group they've come from on why they should consider making the same journey that you did. The problem is you came from about 15 different groups. So assuming that one of those folk is sitting outside at home or listening on the radio somewhere, talk to them. Why should they make the same journey home that you made?
Well, for those that are Jewish that are listening, I would say this, that the fulfillment of your faith is in the Catholic Church. The altar, the sacrifices, the Messiah, the priesthood, it's all there. If you read the scriptures, you'll find the fulfillment here. For Protestants, it's the unity of the faith in the bond of peace. It's us being united together, all in one church, all under one roof, eating one spiritual food together, one pastor. And for Catholics, reach out to Jewish brothers and sisters, to Protestant brothers and sisters, because we're all in this together. This is the fight of our lives, to defend the kingdom of God against the forces of darkness, build a culture of life instead of a culture of death.
Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus.
God bless you and your work and your witness and your family, and look forward to having you again sometime on the journey home.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope this has been an inspiration to you. We've got to take a stand. Take what we believe in our head and in our heart and take an act on it. God bless you. See you again next week.